Welcome, friends. This is James Corbett of CorbettReport.com. It is the 4th of September, 2013, and today we're joined on the line by Christoph Germann, who people might know from his work at BoilingFrogsPost.com, where he writes a regular series called The New Great Game Roundup, where he examines the quest for power and influence and hegemony over the Central Asia and the Caucasus region by the U.S. NATO bloc and the Russia-China bloc, and all of the developments that are taking place there. Of course, people who are familiar with the Gladio B series that I did with Sibel Edmonds will know that this is really the ground zero for those types of operations, and is a very fascinating and increasingly important part of the global chessboard. Christoph is also available on Twitter, and he also has a blog at blogspot.com, which I will link up in the show notes for this interview, so you can go directly there. Christoph, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Cover a lot of different events that are going on. Let's talk about some of the other players that are on this chessboard and some of their motivations. And one that we've talked about at great length with Sibel Edmonds is Turkey and its role to play. And I understand there's been some interesting documents released through Cryptome recently that brings in Yassin al-Qadi, who should be a familiar face to some of the people who have been following our conversations in the past. But let's talk about those documents that were released on Cryptome.
Of course, Yassin al-Qadi is a Saudi businessman. He was placed on a global terrorist list. He's known as a terrorist financier and for his connections to PTEC, which was, of course, famously featured in the 9/11 operation. He is alleged to have financed Osama bin Laden, Hamas, and other terrorist groups. But more importantly, he has connections to Fethullah Gulen and his backing. And with that, the current Turkish government's protection. He is a close friend of Erdogan, and Erdogan defended him even a few times and said something like, "I know Yassin, I believe in him as I do in myself." But more importantly, Yassin al-Qadi has the blessing of the United States. He and his business, they also operate in the United Kingdom with compute backing and immunity, and he also has several front businesses in Azerbaijan, which is no surprise, given he was also a frequent figure in the pre-9/11 Azerbaijan meetings, which are now infamous and which featured, among others, current Al-Qaeda #1 Ayman al-Zawahiri, Yassin al-Qadi, and also Bandar Bush, along with several members of U.S. intelligence and military establishment. And more recently, Yassin al-Qadi was in Turkey and had several meetings with Hakan Fidan, who is the head of Turkish intelligence, MIT. They met at least 5 times, despite al-Qadi's restrictions of entering Turkey. And there was an interesting accident lately, which reminded me of the Susurluk accident, in which al-Qadi, one of his business associates, and Ibrahim Yildiz, the police lieutenant at the Prime Minister's Guards office, were injured and were taken to hospital, and the accident was immediately reported to Erdogan by Mustafa Latif Topaz, who is a Turkish billionaire and close friend of Yassin al-Qadi, and Prime Minister Erdogan asked his son Bilan to go to the hospital and to check after Yassin al-Qadi. Al-Qadi is closely financed, very closely with Erdogan, and is financed by people like Mustafa Latif Topaz, and has partnerships with other interesting people in Turkey, like, for example, the Safsu family. The Safsu family, the brothers Cüneyt Safsu and Aziz Safsu, established, for example, the BMI United Markets chain in 1995 with Mustafa Latif Topaz and also Fatih Sharaj. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. The BMI United Markets is a dairy discounter. It's modeled after Germany's Aldi chain. Aldi is very popular in Germany. The 2 Aldi brothers are the 2 richest German people, or were the 2 richest German people. One recently died, and now the other brother, Karl Albrecht, is the richest person in Germany. It was very popular here and also in Turkey, and was eventually sold for $1.5 million. And al-Qadi was one of the major shareholders in BIM and participated also in several board meetings. The Safsu brothers are very close to Erdogan and use their connections. Cüneyt Safsu is, for example, Erdogan's personal aide and senior advisor. He is often referred to as the shadow foreign minister or Erdogan's right hand. And he uses his relationship to Erdogan to push through legislation which benefits him and his brother and the businesses they are associated with. The Sabsu family controls, for example, Azizla Holdings, which is one of the many large holding companies in Turkey. And there's even a nickname for the push of legislation in connection with the Sabsus called the Sabsu Law. Cüneyt Sabsu is also the vice chairman of the board of the Turkish American Business Council and the Turkish German Business Council, and also serves as senior advisor to the World Economic Forum. He's very wealthy and very well connected. And organizations like the Turkish American Business Council and Turkish German Business Council are, of course, very interesting, with the Turkish German Business Council, for example, being the equivalent to the American Turkish Council, for example, involved in all kinds of shady business, for example, drug trafficking, transferring drugs from Turkey to Belgium and the Netherlands. And we see that there's a little tight circle in Turkey of persons involved in all kinds of criminal activities, very close connected to the Turkish establishment and the Turkish government. And Yassin al-Qadi is, of course, one of the important figures in this. And he's also one of the interesting persons in the Azerbaijan meetings, and therefore probably one of the important Gladio B operatives, which are used by the United States and NATO for these kind of operations.
That's exactly right, and it's fascinating to watch this come together. And just for people's reference out there, the articles that we're referring to that are on Cryptome are Yassin al-Qadi, a ban from entering country, which talks about Qadi's supposed ban from entering Turkey, but the fact that he has entered the country. And there's a related post from June 14th, Turkish traffic accident with deep connections, that goes into that accident that involved Qadi and Mr. Hakan Fidan. Absolutely fascinating. And as you say, there's obviously shades of Susurluk in this, where the Abdullah Chatli connections to the Turkish government and the deep state were exposed. And I think this probably does have similar resonance and similar connotations, but Susurluk has become something of a scandal, a major scandal in Turkish politics. Is this accident being talked about at all in Turkey?
I haven't followed the Turkish media, but I haven't seen anything which would suggest that it's been exposed as a major scandal. There had been some reports in Turkey, I think, but nothing in English, if I remember correctly, only in Turkish.
Very interesting. Well, we'll definitely have to keep our eye on that and see what develops from it. But obviously, Yassin al-Qadi is one of those important figures that we do need to keep our eye on. As you say, has so much deep connection to Gladio B and to PTEC and 9/11 and all of these events. So very fascinating piece of the puzzle. Christoph, before we let you go today, you say that you were partly motivated to get into this because of Syria and what's happening there. So I would really like to get your take on recent developments in Syria, not only the chemical weapons attack that was alleged to take place from the Assad forces, but also the emergence of Prince Bandar on the scene and his connection to the possible false flag attack that took place there. I'd like to get your take on what's actually happening in Syria right now.
Yeah, that's very interesting, especially Bandar's reappearance after he disappeared for several times. And it was reported that he had been assassinated, probably. And then he reappeared in Moscow, meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin and basically threatening Putin, saying, if you don't change your position on Syria, you will get some problems in the Caucasus with the Chechen Mujahideen. We are the Chechen freedom fighters. We are supporting there. We are controlling there. And as Bandar predicted, when the Russians and Saudis didn't reach an agreement, the situation escalated in Syria with the chemical weapons attack, which we now know was maybe even supplied by Bandar and his Saudi minions to the rebels, the so-called rebels in Damascus, in Ghouta. And there were reports about the rebels being really angry at Bandar because they weren't instructed how to use the weapons, and then some of them exploded and they were exposed to the chemicals. Yes, I think the chemical weapons attack is probably not been not been deployed by the Syrian government. Wouldn't make any sense for Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to use the weapons. He was winning. In fact, on a day, the chemical weapons were first time reported, I think, 20th of August. There was a report in the Russian media saying that Syrian president and the Syrian government is winning the war, and it would only take 2 weeks or something in this time to basically get control over the rest of the country and push the jihadis out of the important strategic parts. And then we see the escalation with the chemical weapons attack, and now the United States preparing to launch a military campaign, completely illegal, of course, as usual. And I first thought that it would be only a small attack with a few Tomahawk cruise missiles. But now we're seeing reports that this should last about 60 days. So I'm not quite sure what kind of attack the United States have in mind, because a large attack could obviously really expand the conflict to a regional war with Iran, for example, coming out and saying that a large attack would trigger a war and would basically lead to a war between Iran and Israel in the region, which would be a complete disaster for everybody involved. So I'm not quite sure how the game plan of Obama is on this. The Saudis are obviously very concerned about the whole situation, and they want regime change no matter what, because they see this struggle as existential for their own survival, probably losing their Shiite province in the east of Saudi Arabia, which would mean they would lose large numbers of their oil supplies. So I think that Saudi Arabia will continue to push for regime change no matter what. But we have to see how the United States will go about their military action, and what kind of action this will be, and how the Syrian government and its allies, especially Iran and Hezbollah, will respond to this. Russian President Putin said today that he strongly opposes military action, and he wants to see evidence for the United Nations Security Council. And he doesn't believe that the Syrian government was responsible for the attack, but rebels were probably responsible because they had everything to gain from the attack, and Assad had nothing to gain from it.
Exactly, and the parallels between what happened recently and what happened back in March with the attack on Khan al-Assal is there. And of course, in that case, they spent months going through the evidence and presenting a report and presenting it to the UN, and versus this, where basically the US came out before the inspectors had even visited the site to say Assad was to blame, and they had to start bombing. So it's quite transparent, I think, that this is just a convenient casus belli. But this is, I mean, what a fascinating situation with Prince Bandar, and we'll have to see, I guess, if he makes good on his threats to Putin regarding the Chechen terrorists. But at any rate, just a really interesting situation, but of course one that really is of great concern, especially if this does turn into a protracted battle, which could then lead to a larger regional conflict. So very, very important things that are happening right now in Syria. And as you say, I think we'll have to see how this plays out. But the surprising thing so far has been that the headlong rush to war has not happened so far. I mean, we saw the British Parliament kick back against David Cameron, and we've seen some resistance in the US that has actually led Obama to back down and tuck tail between his legs and go to Congress to ask for approval. So we have seen some significant setbacks to this headlong rush to war. How about the general media there in Europe, in Germany specifically? How are they treating this, and how is this being portrayed?
The media in Germany is basically directed from Washington, as is the politics of the German government. We are very much influenced by what's happening in the United States, and the media is reporting always with a very strong spin on the issue, and always reporting in the like the United States would want to have it reported in Europe. And so the public opinion is always being influenced against Russia, for example, against China, against Syria, and always for the United States. No matter how bad the situation looks, and no matter how clear the evidence is, But there has been some awakening, I think, with alternative media gaining ground and establishment media losing their credibility more and more each day.
Excellent. Well, all part of that global political awakening, which Brzezinski fears so much, but which is taking place, and is taking place because of the work of people like yourself and the excellent work you're doing with the new Great Game Roundup at boilingfrogspost.com. So I hope people will check that out. Again, the links to your blog and to your Twitter will be in the links for the show notes of this interview, so people can start following your work, and I hope they do so. Christoph, a fascinating conversation, and there's much, much, much more to talk about, but I think we'll have to leave that for another day. So I think we'll wrap things up there, but thank you very much for your time today, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.